Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe Pisapia. That, of course, is Kyle Yates, and it's you. And we got a lot of football to do today. We've got a great guest. We're talking about some ECR rankings, and there's nobody better to talk about it with than the reigning, defending, undisputed champion of ranking, and he'll be on in just a second. But we have a lot of football news to break down as well. We have a running back out for the year and a running back changing some addresses. We're going to get to all of that and a little game, a little fantasy odd man out. So everybody likes a fun game. Yates, what's your board game of choice? You got a board game that's your go-to that you love?
Board game of choice?
Yeah, I'm a Clue guy. I like Clue. It's fun.
Oh man, board games. We haven't gotten to the stage with my son where we're playing board games regularly, right? Like he's still 3, so it's not like we're playing those regularly. I'll go to one that has some nostalgia for me, and that is playing Stratego with my dad. We used to play that all the time when I was growing up, and so I absolutely love that game. That just whenever I sit down and play that, that's there's some nostalgia.
I love Monopoly, but nobody will ever play it with me anymore for obvious reasons. But Stratego is a good one. And speaking of strategy, there's nobody better here. You've seen him last week. He joined us for a little while on the Fest, and it's just not enough. We have to get more of our good friend Pat Fitzmaurice to join us again. He was the lead ranker last year on Fantasy Pros. You can check out his work at footballgirl.com. Also, he's the host of Fitz on Fantasy podcast. Pat, welcome to the show, champ. How are you?
Joe, I'm doing great. It's been less than a week since we spoke on the Fest, but I was counting down the hours till we could talk again, and I wasn't there with Yates. Yates was taking a break to smoke a cigar or something like that, so it's great to see him again, and he's really making me feel nostalgic for Stratego. I mean, what a great game. I know Rich Rebar, Lord Reeves, is a big fan of Stratego, and as sharp as he is, I don't think I would ever want to play him, so... Yeah, that was a classic for sure.
It's all about having that fake area where it might be where the flag is, but you zoop them into one area. It's the bait and switch. My kids love it. I've taught them how to play that game. It is a classic. And speaking of classic strategy, Pat has been gracious enough to give us some of his time. We're going to talk about players that he is higher and lower on in ECR compared to the rest of the consensus, and that is always an important thing to look at. We're also going to break down some of the latest news. Before we do, I just want to let everybody know once again that we're giving away free stuff here, so if you go to fantasypros.com/contest, you can get involved in that Clyde Edwards-Helaire free helmet giveaway. It's autographed, it's glorious. It's the inverted too. It's very sexy. When you go to fantasypros.com/contest, you'll see the helmet, and you're going to automatically want to get involved in this. And it's very simple to do so. Just leave a great review of the show over on Apple Podcasts or CastBox. Screenshot it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you get the 3x entry, and then upload all that stuff to fantasypros.com/contest. And that autographed, inverted, really cool black and red Chiefs helmet can be yours. Again, you're welcome. We give away free stuff here. And speaking of basically free stuff, look, we're getting closer and closer to the end of draft season here, and also the beginning of football season. I'm trying to help everybody out, so this is a public service announcement more than anything. fantasypros.com/offers. All you got to do is make a $10 deposit of one of our partner sites, right? So any of those partner sites, make a $10 deposit, play some more fantasy, and what you're going to get is 6 free months of our Hall of Fame package. That will take you all the way through the football season. That's a $65 value. You'll get the IDP show with that as well. Bogman and I are going to be hosting that every week. We just did the first one yesterday. That's going to come out probably today, I believe, or tomorrow. So you get all these cool things, plus all the access to that great stuff at the Draft Wizard, the simulator, the cheat sheets, all the stuff that you want to be prepared for not only your draft, but also all season long. That Hall of Fame package can be yours. Again, just go to fantasypros.com/offers. $10 gets you $65 value. I don't know what's better than that. I know certainly what would be better would be a healthy Travis Etienne, but we're not going to get that this year, boys. So let's just start there. When we did the podcast yesterday, Yates, I was much more depressed about it than other people. I was saying 12 weeks. I hate when I'm more right sometimes. This is terrible. I've got a lot of shares. Luckily, most of them were as a flex RB, so that is easier to replace. But look, what's the impact here in terms of moving up Robinson in these rankings? And also, what's the impact and how do people who have ETN now kind of move forward and look for something else that might be on the early waiver wire for them?
Yeah, this is a bummer. I was definitely excited for Travis Etienne and what he could do in this Jacksonville Jaguars offense, particularly as a receiver. So I think with Etienne, he was placed on IR before the deadline starts, where then you can place a player on IR and then they can come back early or later on in the season. So he is like done for 2021. I mean, there's maybe a possibility, but I think he's done for all of 2021. So just if you drafted already, drop him to the waiver wire. You're not going to want to stash him this entire time. So with Robinson, though, obviously he benefits from this. He was a guy that I was down a little bit further down than consensus on, especially further down than ADP. And with James Robinson, he moved up to RB19 for me. So he's a guy that I think you can get away with as a mid-range RB2. He produced last year just insane numbers in a very, very bad offense, but he was getting a ton of volume. I think the volume, again, will be there this year, but I just can't put him over guys like CEH, J.K. Dobbins, these other guys that have just insane upside, even Chris Carson. I just can't move him above them. So he's a fine mid-range RB2. I think he slid in right after David Montgomery for me. So just kind of in that vein is how I'm viewing James Robinson for this year.
All right. How about you, Pat, when you're talking about now the value of James Robinson going into the season? Look, it's refreshed, it's renewed now. So everybody who got early cheap shares of Robinson is going to benefit from this. But for those who haven't drafted yet, what's the approach when it comes to him?
Yeah, so I think he finished, running back 7 last year in a half-point PPR. I'm not quite expecting that good a finish. We don't know quite how he's going to fit into the Urban Meyer offense. And, they've got Carlos Hyde there, an ex-Buckeye, so maybe he gets some run too. But I've got him at running back 15 now, just behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And, with some of the other guys Yates mentioned, I've got him just ahead of Dobbins, Carson, Montgomery. So I think that's kind of a tier, those guys. And I'd be, I think we're just kind of splitting hairs with the guys from that group, but that's kind of where he belongs. He's certainly an attractive target now in like maybe the 4th round of, well, not even, probably like the early 3rd round of drafts. I think we might start seeing him go as early as the 2-3 turn. So yeah, really a bummer about ETN. I was pretty heavily invested in him myself, but hopefully he comes back good as new next year.
All right, from splitting hairs to maybe splitting carries, it looks like Darrell Henderson's got some friends now in the backfield with Sony Michel coming over. So, Pat, this news broke this morning. Not shocking. I think all of us were kind of sitting there waiting for eventually the Rams to add something. Now, I'm kind of glad they didn't just add somebody who's just some veteran off the waiver wire that nobody wanted. They added a piece that was on a roster in a trade with the Patriots, bringing in Michel, who looked pretty good in camp, as we were talking about before the show. So the Patriots had an excess of running backs. It's a good deal for the Pat side. From the Ram side, certainly a good deal, bringing in a guy who's been in the league a few years, but not so many years that he's going to be useless. Is the Sony Michel presence now, in your opinion, something that anybody who has Darrell Henderson or likes Darrell Henderson has to be at least a little bit more conscious of and maybe potentially adjust their rankings? Because can he take enough away from him to be frustrating, especially potentially around the goal line?
Yeah, so I was maybe ranking Henderson pretty conservatively coming in. I think I had him at running back 20. And I don't think I'm going to move him down based on the Michel trade. But I just kind of think that the Rams were terrified after Henderson got this thumb injury, after they basically kept him in bubble wrap for most of the preseason, and he still gets this injury. That had to scare them. I don't think they wanted to play Xavier Jones as their number one. Jake Funk, a guy who's probably just a special teamer. I mean, he's really good at that, but I don't think I think he was like the Ryan Nall guy for Nall with the Bears last year. Like, the Bears did anything in their power not to play that guy, and I think that would have been the same with Funk. So now they've at least got more bodies in the backfield. I don't even know if Sony Michel threatens Jones that much. I guess he's not the clear number 2 guy, but it's possible Jones could still factor in this offense. I think the guy that this trade really affects the most is Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, we have to get excited about this guy now. Like, the Patriots had a crowded backfield before. It was hard to see how Stevenson was going to fit in, but now this guy who's scored 4 touchdowns in 2 preseason games might just get a shot to be their goal line guy and change a pace back. And big dude, nimble, pass catching ability. Like, if we're excited about Najee Harris, can't we get at least a little excited about Ramondre Stevenson, who can be like a dollar store Najee Harris.
Ah, the dollar store Najee Harris. I like that very much. Yates, what are your thoughts on both ends of this deal?
Yeah, I've got a lot of them. So with Darrell Henderson, this does not move him at all in my rankings. I mean, Sony Michel, you look at the Patriots backfield, it had Damian Harris at the top. Ramondre Stevenson was playing his way into a role, 7.7 yards per carry in the preseason so far, 4 rushing touchdowns. Like, you've got to give this guy a roster spot. And then you've still got James White on this roster who can fill that veteran pass catching role. And then J.J. Taylor also has shown a lot here in the preseason. You're not going to carry 5 running backs into the NFL season, so who's the odd man out? It's the guy who hasn't been doing a ton over the past couple of years. It's Sony Michel. So Sony Michel was most likely going to be a cut candidate anyway. The Rams send away, a 5th and 6th round pick, which will eventually turn into a 4th round pick if they do get the comp pick for John Johnson leaving in free agency next year. So they sent away a 4th round pick, and people are pointing to that and saying, well, this, they sent away a 4th round pick. This means that he's going to be involved and that he could potentially, Adam Schefter's coming out this morning saying that he could be the lead back in this offense. And I just want to say, we should not be looking at the Los Angeles Rams and their draft pick value to indicate their roles and what they are going to do. This is the team that spent a 2nd round pick on Tutu Atwell, who could have been there in the 5th round pick, a role player for them. They send away 1st round picks. They do not care about the draft picks at all. So sending away this draft capital, which we view as okay, that's significant. That means that they're going to use him. It really doesn't mean anything for me because it's the Los Angeles Rams. And additionally, Sony Michel, arthritis in his knee. This is not a guy that you're going to give 200 plus carries to on the season. Is he going to he's a veteran presence on this backfield? Because if something happens to Darrell Henderson now, you have Xavier Jones, who hasn't seen a snap in the NFL, and Jake Funk as your only other 2 options. You needed another body in here. And they viewed Sony Michel as a positive guy that can step in if needed and carry the load, at least to the point if Henderson goes down, right? Break glass in case of emergency. So I think that Sony Michel is going to see 5, 6 carries per game. Darrell Henderson is not going to be a bell cow. He wasn't even going to be a bell cow, even with the Cam Akers injury, even before this. But if you give him 12 to 15 carries per game in this offense that I project to be a top 5 scoring offense, and you have him around the goal line, which he's actually really good at, then he can absolutely be a top 15 back. So Henderson, RB15 in my rankings before this trade, RB15 after. He didn't move at all.
All right, I've got him lower. I'm a little bit more concerned than Yates is, just because I think the 17-game season, a little bit more management going on there, especially in the early going. So I still have some guys like Mike Davis ahead of him, some of the other guys that are on that fringe of the RB2 conversation. But it's a good conversation to have, that is for sure. And we'll see. There'll be a lot more shoes to drop in this next few days. So make sure you tune in to us here at Fantasy Pro so we can break it all down for you. All right, let's start with Pat's rankings. The ECR is established, but Pat's got some thoughts and some feels, as all the kids like to say. He's got all the feels about certain guys. So let's talk about the guys that you are higher on, Pat, than the ECR. And let's start at your 2 running backs. Who are the running backs that you are higher on than the ECR?
So I think I've got Miles Sanders a little bit higher. I believe he's my running back 17. And Trey Sermon, who I've got in the early 20s, maybe running back 23. I think I've got Sermon ahead of Javonte Williams, which is probably puts me in a very slim minority of rankers on Fantasy Pros. So Sanders, it's just that I think people were scared initially of the threat that the Eagles were bringing in all these backs in the offseason. They drafted Kenny Gainwell. They signed Kerryon Johnson. They brought back Jordan Howard. But we've kind of now seen these guys fall by the wayside. I mean, Gainwell is playing with the 3rd stringers late in preseason games. Doesn't look like he's an imminent threat to Sanders' role. Kerryon Johnson gone now. So I really do think Sanders is pretty much the clear guy here. Yeah, the other guys will get some run, but Sanders is the main guy. And Sanders' production and efficiency really kind of jumped up after Jalen Hurts took over for what was, just a moribund Eagles offense last year. And, the Eagles had all sorts of offensive line issues. Their line is back and healthy and could potentially be a top 5 line. They've got this running quarterback who, with the read option stuff and the RPO stuff, is going to widen running lanes for Sanders, as we kind of saw last year. And although the reports out of camp are that he's been a little sloppy with his pass catching skills, I think he does have that in his bag of tricks too. So I'm above consensus on him. I would put him into that Chris Carson, David Montgomery category, and I think I've actually got Sanders above Carson because I think he's younger, he's got more juice, and I think he's kind of being undervalued coming into drafts.
All right, now when it comes to Trey Sermon, Pat, I mean, that's a young guy with a lot of juice that I think a lot of us are excited about. I, too, have him higher than most in my rankings. So what is it that you are excited about? Because I know we're all excited about that Shanahan offense, but Mostert is still there, and there's still some other guys around. So do you think Sermon can kind of break out from that group sooner than later?
Yeah, Joe. So you mentioned the Shanahan offense. So I'm going to go back and include Mike Shanahan in this because we have seen that Shanahan zone system turn some guys who were basically jobbers into just phenoms, right? Tatum Bell, Ruben Drones,
Travis Henry. We go over and over.
Right. So like these just run of the mill names have had big seasons in the Shanahan system. But when you put a special back into the Shanahan system, Clinton Portis, Terrell Davis, like league-winning magic there. And if it turns out that Sermon is one of these dudes, and I mean, boy, last year in the college football playoffs, he was terrific. I mean, he ripped apart a really good Northwestern defense last year. And this guy has like the one-cut ability that just fits the Shanahan system so well. And if it turns out that he is one of those magic guys, like, for a mid-round pick, you're talking gold here. And, at worst, I think you're getting a guy who's going to be part of that committee and have some, like, weekly flex type value. And you're paying, like, a flex type price. But the upside here is well worth playing for. I like the pot odds.
Well, I would have to agree. Yeah, I would absolutely have to agree with you, Pat, on that. It's a guy you could draft as a flex that you could possibly get a lot more of. Yates, do you see that same thing when you look at Sermon?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the big point that I was going to double back on with what Pat said, was that where Trey Sermon is going in drafts right now, there's very little downside, right? If it doesn't pan out the way that we think it could, if he doesn't get the majority of the carries here, if we do see Raheem Mostert be that guy to start the season or whatever the case may be, he's still going to have enough work in a very, very good offense to provide you at least flex value, right? You're drafting him as an RB3 right now. You don't have to rely on him as a cornerstone of your fantasy football roster. But if he does take that step forward and does become the guy who is the predominant ball carrier in this backfield, and then you have Raheem Mostert as a change of pace option, then you've got a potential league winner that you got in the mid round. So there is very little downside to Trey Sermon. As the offseason has progressed, I've been just slowly moving him up and up my rankings. And I think that highlighting him and having him above ECR is definitely something that Pat is worthy of doing.
All right, Pat, there's 3 wide receivers you've got that you're higher on than ECR. Give me the names and give me the reasons why.
All right, Jerry Jeudy, Laviska Shenault, and Rondale Moore. And I'll start with Jeudy. I mean, it's just sort of what we've seen on tape from him. I think he's right now still like probably one of the better route runners in the game and one of the better after the catch guys after the game. Like he is just exceptional in both of those areas. And I guess the one point where the one aspect of his game where he fell down was the actual catching of the football last year. But we've seen Davante Adams struggle with that his first couple of years to the point where people, on Twitter used to trash Davante as being terrible. I'm not too worried about drops as an indicator of future success. The same reason I've got Deontay Johnson ranked highly this year. Not at all worried about that. I think the other reason people might be a little more reserved about Jeudy is the target competition and the quarterback situation. With the target competition, I'm thinking that maybe Cortland Sutton is not ready to be Cortland Sutton again. We've kind of heard that from camp that he just does not go up and win those balls in the air like he used to. Like maybe the knee is still not quite there. We've seen him kind of running some tentative routes in little clips from camp. Like I think Jeudy is going to be the number one guy here. And as far as the quarterbacking, I mean, I think that's actually a reason to be excited about him. Jeudy According to PFF, I believe he led the league in uncatchable targets.
Yep.
Targets just ruled like no chance for the wide receiver by a mile last year. Like it was some ridiculously high number. So like he's bound to get some regression on that. Either Drew Lock gets better, and we've seen some signs of that in the preseason, or they're going to put Teddy in there. And I think Teddy can, we saw Teddy support DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson pretty nicely last year.
And Michael Thomas 2 years ago. Let's not forget when he stepped in there, and he was still pretty good when Breeze was out. So who's number 2 on that wide receiver? That's Shenault. Now, does Shenault for you, Pat, get a little bit of a bump here with Travis Etienne not around?
Yeah, he does for sure, Joe. I mean, we've got the 2 vertical receivers there with DJ Chark and Marvin Jones. And, the rookie quarterback is going to want a reliable short area receiver. And I think that's clearly Shenault now, especially with ETN out. Like, I don't think the ETN loss necessarily means that, the Jaguars are just out of luck as far as a reliable pass catcher. We saw James Robinson do enough of it last year. He doesn't have the same juice in the passing game that ETN has, but I think they're going to find ways now for Shenault to be sort of that Swiss Army knife. And this is a big dude. I mean, Shenault reminds me of like young Anquan Bolden before Bolden was, running an offensive lineman type 40 time in his later years. Like when Bolden was younger and had a little bit of burst and then just being one of the harder guys to tackle in the game, I think Shenault can be that. Because like, man, if you go back and watch Shenault's sophomore year at the University of Colorado, like you couldn't help but get excited about
it's fun tape.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to see a little more of that this year, and I think we're going to.
And then the third guy is Rondell Moore, who's getting a lot of buzz here on this show too. So why is he getting buzz in your rankings?
Yeah, you want to talk about exciting college tape. Go back to 2018 at Purdue and Rondell Moore. I mean, Purdue has not been appointment viewing on a college football Saturday since Drew Brees was running Joe Tiller's offense. Like
I remember it well.
And Moore, single-handedly beat Ohio State that year. 18 touchdowns, I think, like 1,800 combined yards from scrimmage. He was just a monster. And the naysayers are going to say that it's like kind of a gimmicky usage for him, that he's run on all these like little flare-outs and bubble screens and then, occasional handoffs, jet sweeps. Okay, yeah, Cliff Kingsbury is the right coach for that.
Gimmick to me, right? Exactly.
I mean, yeah, everyone knocks Cliff for this horizontal passing game that he's running. Like they were running those routes to Larry Fitzgerald last year. Now they're getting them to Rondell Moore, who might literally be twice as fast as Larry Fitzgerald. So, I think we're going to see a lot more receptions. Whatever the over-under number is on Rondell Moore receptions, I want the over, and I'm totally sold that it's going to go way over. 70, 75 catches would not surprise me at all. And man, this guy's not some frail little dude. This guy squats 600 pounds or something ridiculous. This guy is Mighty Mouse. And I'm really excited about him. I've been getting him in more than half of my drafts. I've been annoyed by Ian Hartitz, who I've found myself in a lot of drafts with lately and likes Rondell even more than I do and keeps stealing him from me. So, definitely a guy to be targeting in the 13th, 14th round of your draft.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, I feel very warm and fuzzy when you say nice things about Jerry Jeudy, who I continuously just keep pounding the table for. And, Yates, you were kind of lighting up there when he was talking about some of the college tape of Laviska Shenault and Rondell Moore. Yeah. Is this a year where these guys are going to outperform their ADP, in your opinion, or, even the ECR as we're talking about here?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things with Laviska Shenault going into the year was Urban Meyer comes in as head coach and you say, all right, well, Laviska Shenault kind of fits this role that he's always had in his offenses with Paris Campbell at Ohio State, with Kadarius Toney that he had at Florida. These players that are able to create yards after the catch in the horizontal aspect of the game. They work underneath and then they pick up yards after the catch, and it's speed. So then you look at Laviska Shenault and you're like, perfect. He can fit that role because he not only has speed at his size, but then he also has the size to go with it that he can, and fantastic contact balance too, and getting yards after contact. He's like a running back out there in the open field. So you look at that and you go, all right, Laviska Shenault, perfect. He fills that role. And then they go after Kadarius Toney in the first round of the NFL draft. They don't get him, so then they draft Travis Etienne. And it's like, okay, well, Etienne's probably going to fill that role. So I was lower on Laviska Shenault because I had all that role being dedicated to Travis Etienne. Well, now Etienne's out of the picture, and Laviska Shenault comes flying up my rankings. I've now got him at wide receiver 41 on the year because he is going to fill a very, very valuable role for this offense. And you talk about it, Pat, with DJ Chark stretching the field with his 4.3 speed or whatever he's got. Marvin Jones is a deep field threat and contested catch ability. And then you've got an opening here underneath with no tight end, right? James O'Shaughnessy is like their tight end one on this offense. Spoiler alert, he's not going to do much this year. So you've got to have either James Robinson catching a ton of passes out of the backfield, or Laviska Shenault is going to get fed. And so I think Laviska Shenault definitely, as a guy who has fantastic college tape, who has that role locked up to him and guaranteed to him, is absolutely going to be a value in fantasy football drafts this year. It's just a matter of staying healthy for him, which is also the same thing with Rondale Moore. You know, you talk about Rondale Moore and the electric season that he had in 2018, and as soon as you say Rondale Moore, the immediate thought is Ohio State 2018. Like, that game just comes immediately to mind because he absolutely dominated. And then we really didn't see him much on the field over the next couple seasons here. So he gets the draft capital here in Arizona. I think he's going to fill a very valuable role. You talk about he's going to get force-fed targets. So I think he has a little bit more value in PPR leagues, but it's kind of the same thing with Deebo Samuel in San Francisco last year, where it's like the ADOT was 2.2 yards for Samuel. So far through the preseason, it's kind of been around the same, maybe even less for Rondale Moore. So he needs to be incredibly, incredibly efficient with his yards after the catch in order to be able to sustain fantasy value to the point where he's in the flex conversation week in and week out. If there ever was a player to do that, though, it is Rondale Moore. I just have questions about the consistency. So, Pat, one of the questions I was going to ask you is, where exactly do you have him in your rankings? Is he a guy that you're like drafting 2 rounds ahead to be able to get him as a flex on your roster? Or is he someone that's still in like the 50s, the 60s, a guy that you're taking, stashing on your bench in hopes that he can be something, you know, and grow into a role?
I've got him at 46 right now in half point PPR. So right in the, like, I think he's just behind DJ Chark. I've got him ahead of Elijah Moore. Like, I think he's the better rookie Moore wide receiver to have. So at 46, like, I'm pretty confident that I'm going to have him ranked ahead of most people and be pretty far on the leading edge. So he is a guy, like, I'll jump people to maybe, you know, get him in the 12th, 13th. Like, ideally, he's like my 5th or 6th receiver, where he doesn't have to necessarily be a guy I lean on every week, but a guy who, if he pops, there he is for me as my 3rd receiver flex guy, potentially.
Very good, very good. And with Shenault, you said, where do you have him right now, Yates? You said 43?
I have him at 41.
Okay, I've got him at 43, so we're pretty close there as well. So all of us have made the adjustments, and shame on us for not talking about that earlier when we talked about Robinson, because that's kind of the ripple effect too. So glad we hit it here. All right, Pat, let us switch gears here to your quarterback and tight end that you are higher on. And I got to tell everybody right now, when I saw the name, I'm super excited for who you're going to talk about at quarterback because I think it's overdue.
Yeah, it's Trevor Lawrence. So I've got him as my quarterback 12, ahead of guys like Tom Brady, which is going to annoy a lot of people, but we'll talk more about that a little later. And Joe Burrow, which might annoy Yates because I know Yates is the big Joe Burrow guy. Basically with Lawrence, I mean, we've just talked about the Jaguars offense, so I won't, trample over that ground again. But like, this guy stepped in as this highly touted high school star. Instantly, you know, he was the real deal from day one at Clemson. And he did everything everyone ever hoped of him. I really think he is the best quarterback prospect to come out of college since Andrew Luck. And, like, maybe the buzz about him is not what it would be because there's so much excitement right now about Trey Lance and Justin Fields, and deservedly so. Like, this is a really exciting year for rookie quarterbacks. So, but just because those guys are stepping into spots where maybe they're not assured the starting gig right away, they're getting a little more attention than Trevor Lawrence, who's going to start no matter what Urban Meyer says about this being a competition with Gardner Minshew. Yeah, that's an eye roll for sure. It's going to be Lawrence. And what I like, you know, not only do I think he's going to be a credible NFL passer right away, and have some pretty exciting pass catchers at his disposal with the 2 vertical threats in Charkin and Marvin Jones and then Chenault. But like this guy runs, and he runs aggressively, and he's a big dude, and he's not afraid to take a hit. Maybe he should be a little more afraid to take hits in preseason games. I didn't like seeing him get knocked around against the Saints the other night.
Yep.
But this guy's going to add like 4 to 6 rushing touchdowns. He's going to add 200 to 350 rushing yards. Like he's going to add some value there, and you need that. Like that's going to... Like, it's hard for a guy to be a legitimate quarterback one now in fantasy if he does not add rushing value. You know, we're going to see that with Matthew Stafford. He's in a great situation this year, but, like, he's not going to get that rushing boost. So he probably has, like, quarterback 10 as a ceiling. I don't think Lawrence even has that as a limiting thing. I could see him finishing as high as QB7, QB8 as a rookie. And he's a guy you can typically get quarterback 15 in your draft as sort of an afterthought.
Yeah, I've been talking that we're not hyping him enough. Like all of our attention's gone to those other guys, and rightfully so, they deserve it, but we're like taking him for granted. And what you're mentioning too, Pat, is that concept of him, you know, rushing, that we forget about how good he was in college doing that, but also the necessity that offensive line is not good. He's going to get flushed from that pocket quite a bit. So that's going to force him into running the football maybe a little bit more. And your tight end that you're higher on than everybody else, who is that, Pat?
Yeah, so this is I'm exactly one spot higher on this guy than everyone else. It's George Kittle, who I've actually got ahead of Darren Waller, which I know is kind of a controversial thing these days, but I guess it's like I see both of these guys as 2-3 turn type of guys, and Waller's typically going now in like the mid-second round, and Kittle maybe early third. Like I see almost a half a round to a full round difference between the two, and I'm not sure why. Waller had 145 targets last year, which I think was tied for the 5th highest target total for any tight end in the last decade. So I think he's kind of at the zenith of his target capacity right now. Kittle has very steadily over the last 3 years averaged like 8 targets a game versus Waller's 9 last year. So he's right there. The big difference being Waller was at like 8.2 yards per target or something last year. Kittle's 3-year average on yards per target is 10. I mean, this guy is just so efficient, such a monster, and it's mainly because the 2 hardest guys to tackle in the NFL are Derrick Henry and George Kittle. Like, this guy is an absolute beast. I think people are a little scared that, well, San Francisco has better wide receivers, so they're going to somehow put a dent in Kittle's target share, even though in the games where he played with Ayuk and Debo, where they were all healthy last year, he averaged basically the same as he always does, 8.3 targets a game. People are also kind of assuming maybe that Ruggs and Bryan Edwards don't take a step up for the Raiders. They've got John Brown there too. And I think people also see David Carr as maybe, or Derek Carr's more of a reliable ball
Don't
delivery
feel bad.
system.
I still do that all these years later. Every now and then I'll give you a San Diego Charger every year. Every now and then I'll give you the wrong car. So it happens to all of us. Don't worry.
Yeah. So, and like I know Yates is going to reject the idea that somehow the quarterbacking is better equipped to feed Waller than it is for Kittle. You know, when we're going to get Trey Lance eventually throwing to Kittle. So to me, like they're neck and neck. I actually like Kittle a little more. I mean, in overall rankings, I've got them side by side. But whereas I think Waller's being a little overdrafted, I think Kittle's being a little underdrafted.
All right, Yates, when it comes to Waller and Kittle, this is fun because, you know, yesterday we had Erickson on the show talking about Waller. Today we have Pat on talking about Kittle. And this is why I love the guests we bring in, because they make such good arguments. I'm curious, where do you land on that argument between those two guys?
You're not going to get a huge difference here, or like a huge fight for me, because I've got these guys separated by 2 fantasy points in my projections.
That seems
so
like a lot.
I'm fine. I know, right? I'm fine with either one. I think an argument going in George Kittle's direction has been just the drops from the receiver options here in San Francisco. You know, Brandon Ayuk struggling with drops. Yeah. Deebo Samuel struggling with drops here throughout the preseason. So once Trey Lance does take over, or even Jimmy Garoppolo, it's like, I want to go to a guy who I know is going to catch the football, and because of Kyle Shanahan's scheme, George Kittle is always freaking open, and I don't understand how NFL defenses are like, maybe we should double team this guy so that way he's not always open, but he seemingly always is. So yeah, I think the only thing standing in George Kittle's way of finishing at the end of the season above Darren Waller is injury, right? That's the only thing that is standing, I think, in George Kittle's way, because I do think that he's going to have a guaranteed volume in this offense. I don't think Brandon Ayuk, I'm a little bit lower on Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, because I do think that so many of the target share is still going George Kittle's way. He's the number one option in this offense. So I completely agree with Pat. The only thing that I would just push back on a little bit there is to say, like, the injury risk. That's the only thing here. But Darren Waller also has missed some time earlier on this offseason with an injury as well. He's back at practice now, but Kittle has a little bit more of a lengthy injury history with that.
All right, let's move on here to some of the guys now, Pat, that you are lower on the ECR, and we will get to Fantasy Odd Man Out as well, so don't go anywhere. We got a whole lot of football left to do. Pat, let's start with the running backs that you are a little lower on than everybody else. So let's look at the downside of the two running backs you selected.
Yeah, Mike Davis and David Montgomery. Montgomery, I think we can cover pretty quickly. I like him. I don't think he's going to have the same sort of role, obviously, last year. Regardless of whether Tariq Cohen comes back healthy, they've got Damian Williams now. There's going to be a downtick in volume for sure. They don't want to work Montgomery to death the way they did last year. And the Bears' offensive line is still pretty terrible. I think the offense might have some growing pains if it's Justin Fields there. I don't see Justin Fields as being a big check down guy once he gets in. So I'm just a little nervous about Montgomery. Don't have a big beef with where he's being drafted, but since I'm a little lower, I'm not winding up with him really in any drafts. Mike Davis is more the guy I would be setting off, warning flares about. Mm-hmm. He is, to me, just the kind of guy I never really want to draft. A guy who is, I think this is going to be his age 28 season, a 28-year-old career backup being pushed up boards due to volume projection. And it's a projection. Sure, like we don't, have any faith in Quadri Allison or Javian Hawkins or Cordero Patterson or whoever else the Falcons might bring into this backfield. But I'm not willing to just buy that we can put Mike Davis down in pen for 200 to 250 carries. And he goes at a point in drafts, like the 5th round, where there are still good receivers available. Like T. Higgins and Deontay Johnson might be available there. It might be your last chance to get, upper echelon tight ends like Mark Andrews or T.J. Hawkinson. It might be Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray or some other premium quarterback there. Like the 5th round is kind of an important pivot point in drafts, and I think Mike Davis is a really bad way to spend a 5th round pick.
And Hawkins actually was just released last night, so one less running back. I know in the flurry of everything else going on, it's hard to catch everything sometimes, but that's one less guy now in that backfield. But look,
I take it all back then, Joe. That's it.
Well, now that Javian
totally
Hawkins
all in on
there,
Mike Davis.
It's all Mike Davis. No, but you're right. I mean, look, Mike Davis is another one of these guys I don't trust as an RB2. As a flex, I'm okay with. Look, I still see Montgomery as a safe kind of investment. I like where he's going. I feel safe about it. I know who he is. I know what he is. When it comes to Davis, though, in particular Yates, that there is one less guy to worry about on the depth chart. Do you feel like we're falling into a false sense of security when it comes to Davis?
I've talked about how I think Davis is going to come out of the gates on fire. I think that he's going to be force-fed volume, and then I have concerns about his durability as the season progresses. So I think that he's going to be a very, very valuable fantasy asset to start the year, and then maybe 3 or 4 weeks into the season, I might be willing to trade him. I might be willing to sell high on Mike Davis to be able to move up the board for maybe a guy who is underperforming throughout the first few weeks of the season, hasn't had some great matchups, whatever the case may be, because I do have concerns about Mike Davis over the course of 17 games. Like Pat said, a 28-year-old career backup. He, even last year when he did step in, he was wearing down as the season progressed. So I think he's going to be force-fed targets and force-fed volume, because where else is it going to go in this offense? But then I have concerns about what this offense is going to look like come week 13, 14, and so on. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think Mike Davis, it's just a matter of now we look at the rest of the board. It's okay, who do I put him behind? All these running backs were starting to get pretty thin. So I think Mike Davis is still someone that I'm willing to draft as a high end RB3. A guy that I can rely on at the beginning of the season, and then hopefully ship off.
It's a default ranking almost, where you're starting to just lose guys. Like there's just nothing after that. And he is the guy, but Pat's right. Just because he's the guy doesn't mean he's going to be great. Though to confuse the two or conflate the two, especially with your draft capital and the guys he's saying you could draft instead and make a different kind of investment and maybe save another round and go, take a Trey Sermon or somebody like that potentially. Or reach if you want. All right, let's talk about your wide receivers that you are a little lower on than the consensus here, Pat. And you've got 3 names, 2 of which are pretty well-known veterans.
Yeah, 2 veterans who have a lot of credibility and goodwill with fantasy managers, Keenan Allen and Adam Thielen. And then DJ Chark. And with Chark, I think it's mostly just the fact that they brought in Marvin Jones, a guy with basically similar skill sets and a guy who's been like really efficient in that role. Just kind of a duplication of things. And when the process started of doing rankings back in January, I think I had Chark just because I'm excited about the talent. I had him maybe in the early to mid 30s, and I think now I've got him down in like the mid 40s. As I mentioned, like just ahead of Rondale Moore at like 45 or so. Right. I think it's going to be hard for him to really pop in this offense when he's got another vertical receiver to compete with. Keenan Allen, like we've heard the talk about Mike Williams playing this X role now in this new offense for the Chargers and how that's probably going to funnel him some extra targets. Keenan's getting a little older. He's answered the durability questions, but he's becoming a little less efficient. We saw him average fewer than 10 yards per catch last year. We saw him average like 6.7 yards per target, which frankly isn't very good. He is still just an elite route runner. When he was asked to compare himself to other route runners, what was the line? Van Gogh, Picasso, them boys. So that was one of the better off-season quotes. And I agree, he's terrific at that. But he is a short area guy. In order for him to really make his bones this year in fantasy, he is going to have to catch a lot of balls. A lot of balls means a greater chance for physical punishment and maybe injury in his older age. So, I still have him at like wide receiver 11 or 12 or something like that. I'm not totally dissing him, but like I think there's a little more risk than people are maybe factoring into the ranking. And then Adam Thielen, okay, we know he's going to regress from the 14 touchdowns. Like that's pretty obvious. I think people are still drawn to the fact that it's a skinny usage tree in the passing game in Minnesota with Jefferson, Thielen, maybe Irv Smith, and that's about it. No legitimate third receiver. But it's kind of been that way anyway, and we saw Thielen average like 9 targets a game in 2017-18. Over the last 2 years, that number has dipped to 6.3 targets a game on average. And like I think targets are earned. Like there's something to that, and that's kind of an alarming drop in targets for a guy whose situation really hasn't changed that much. I mean, the Justin Jefferson arrival certainly maybe diminished his role a little bit, but still a 2-receiver system, same quarterback, and we're seeing this big drop in targets. To me, that's kind of a scary sign. I've got him at like wide receiver 26, 25. Again, I don't think that's too disrespectful, but I know a lot of people have him more like wide receiver 19, wide receiver 20.
Yeah, look, I think what's so dangerous here, Pat, and you're kind of highlighting is these guys have been stable in the past. These guys have been rocks and cornerstones of a lot of good fantasy teams, and another year older and some of those numbers starting to go into a different direction. There's cause for concern, and that's what makes them so dangerous. Yates, do you see any danger in Thielen and Adam specifically, Adam Thielen, as you continue to look at the 2021 board?
Yeah, so I've got Keenan Allen at 12. I think right in that same range as Pat. I acknowledge that, for him, 9.9 yards per reception last year off the top of my head. Like, he has to be that yards per reception has to tick up for him to finish above some of these other guys like a CeeDee Lamb, Terry McLaurin, Allen Robinson in that range. I think Keenan Allen gets a bump up in full PPR formats, obviously, with just how many targets he's going to see. We know that he's still going to be a very, very safe option for you, but I don't think that the upside is there. With Adam Thielen, you are betting on efficiency. Now, the offense hasn't changed, right? You've got some guys that are battling for the wide receiver 3 spot, but, I don't think that Thielen is going to suddenly lose out his wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 job. Justin Jefferson is going to take over, of course, but Thielen is still going to be involved, and he has the chemistry with Kirk Cousins. It's just a matter of, are you willing to bet on that efficiency where he could finish as a top 12 wide receiver? I don't have him ranked there. So, I think, and then DJ Chark, I've been moving him down and down and down as the offseason progresses. I don't have him as low as Pat. But yeah, I think with DJ Chark, it's a concern. The state of the offense, where it's trending, I just have concerns about it.
All right, Pat, you teased the Tom Brady thing earlier, so give us the Tom Brady evaluation, and again, why he can't be great, because it seems like that's all we do every year of why this is the end of Tom Brady, and every year we come back here going, no, it's going to be this year. But look, it's got to be one of these years. Somebody's going to be right, and then give me your tight end also that you are lower on than the consensus while you're at it.
That's it, Joe. I'm going to be public enemy number 1 here, probably with you too, since you're a Pats fan. But like you mentioned it, one of these years, like it's the actuarial tables here. Like he is going to tumble over the age cliff one of these years, and he's 44 now. Okay, he turned 44 earlier this month. And we say, oh, but he's Tom Brady. He's one of the greatest. He's not, like one of these other guys. I mean, the list of guys who have started a game in the NFL at this age, I think it begins and ends with Vinny Testaverde now. Like, he's the only one who's started a game this old.
Wow.
Now, like we say, yes, but Tom Brady is no Vinny Testaverde. This guy's a walk-in Hall of Famer, maybe the best of all time. Yes, agreed. But we have seen some other great quarterbacks slam into the wall at 100 miles an hour at younger ages. We saw Peyton Manning have a great season in 2014.
Right.
In 2015, I mean, the Denver Broncos carried him, dragged him over the finish line to a championship. I mean, he was completely out of gas, and we saw it in 2015. He was 39 in that year where he tumbled over the age cliff. Brett Favre almost gets the Vikings to the Super Bowl in 2009 at age 40. Played great that year. The next year, he was an absolute train wreck. 11 touchdowns, 19 interceptions. He was 41. Tom Brady is 44. I know we love the pass catchers. I know Brady played really well last year, although he should have 4 or 5 interceptions in the NFC Championship game. I'm not going to say anything more about that.
Oh, you're not wrong.
I just think we should be really careful here. And plus, without any running ability, the ceiling is pretty capped here. I think that the ceiling is kind of capped at where he's being drafted, QB9, QB10. But I've got him a little lower, QB14. I just think there's risk here that people are
you're not wrong,
amazingly blind to for a 44-year-old quarterback.
It's just the more you keep looking for it and everyone keeps getting knocked the other way, they keep spinning around and eventually they just get tired of getting punched in the face, I feel like, by Tom Brady. And he lives to do this. This is literally his thing. Now, who's your tight end that you also have in a different spot?
Yeah, I can go fast on this. Robert Tonyan, just to show I can diss on Packers too, as a Packer fan. 88% catch rate last year. About 20% of his catches went for touchdown. It just screams regression. Plus, the Packers have brought Randall Cobb back. They've drafted Amari Rodgers, so there's a little more competition for those short area receptions. I just think regression is imminent. I don't think, a lot of people have Tonyan at the top of that drop-off point at tight end after, we've got the good 6 that everyone wants, going down to Pitts, Andrews, and Hawkinson as 4, 5, 6. Then Logan Thomas is kind of the bridge guy at tight end 7. Then it's kind of messy. I think a lot of people have Tonyan at tight end 8, 9, 10. I think he should be more in the tight end 14, 15 range.
Pat, there's no downside to you ever as a guest. You're one of my favorite people to read and to listen to talk about football, and it's been so fun to actually do a show with you, not once but twice in 7 days time. So I just want to thank you again for your time. You can follow Pat on Twitter at Fitz_FF. And again, check him out as the host of the Fitz on Fantasy podcast and also the work he does with footballgirl.com. Anything else you want to plug here, Pat, before we let you go for the day?
Yeah, just check out the Fitz on Fantasy pod. Yeah, you can just check out the Fitz on Fantasy pod once a week. Usually comes out Monday morning or Tuesday morning. And that's about it. I'm afraid I'm not going to be on the Tom Brady train to hell with you guys, but I'll be at the station waving as you guys leave, and hopefully you have a nice journey there. It's great to talk to both of you guys. Happy drafting.
Absolutely, and happy drafting to everybody else out there too. If you want to get the best tools for your draft, go to fantasypros.com/offers and upgrade on just $10, a $10 deposit to any of our partner sites. That's what you can do. And when you do that at fantasypros.com/offers, you can claim 6 free months of our Hall of Fame package. That's a $65 value. What that does, it allows you to go all the way up as a big-time subscriber of Fantasy Pros, get the cheat sheet creator, get the draft assistant with sync, all the stuff you need for the draft. And then in season, you'll have access to other pods, stuff that's behind some of the paywalls that we do here, including the IDP show, which we just kicked off. The first one's free. After that, you got to come join us where the cool kids are up at the Hall of Fame package, right? You got to get over there. And of course, while you're at it, go to fantasypros.com/contest. That way you can get involved in that Clyde Edwards-Helaire autographed helmet. That is a fantastic piece of swag that is going to impress everybody. And if you have CEH on your fantasy team, why not take a shot? Don't forget, while you're at it, subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you can actually get that 3x entry. Also want to thank the sponsors of today's show, as always, Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. Go to fantrax.com/fantasypros. Sign up today, and you might be going to an NFL regular season game with $6,000 in your pocket. Also, you can sign up for Underdog. Get $25 on us at Underdog Fantasy with the promo code FantasyPros. Play some best ball, have some fun. Fun fantasy football without setting lineups. That's what Underdog is about. And, of course, Pristine Auction, who's giving us that amazing Clyde Edwards-Helaire helmet. Go check out all the cool stuff at Pristine Auction. That's PRISTINE auction.com. And that, of course, is a $5 credit when you use the promo code FantasyPros. That'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Pat Fitzmaurice and Kyle Yates, I'm Joey P. We will see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.